Buonasera e benvenuti.
Good evening and welcome.
Siamo in una trasferta
Today
sul serio
we have an away GiovedìScienza conference, which is going to be different, although we've been doing this for the past few years, and it's an unusual time because today we have something rather unusual, right, Piero? Yes, unusual because this evening is not on a scientific subject, but on a meta-scientific subject, that is to say, the passion for science. The first thing which comes to your mind is a compass, because you know that when Einstein, 5 or 6, had a cold, a bad cold, and was bored in bed, his father gave him a compass. And he was fascinated by this needle that was moving as if it could perceive something that he couldn't, that is to say, a magnetic field. It was like a lightning bolt, and faced with the mystery of this needle, Einstein developed a passion for science. Around it, there was a field, and he spent his life on this field. It wasn't farming, of course, but it's his life. And the notion of field became the prevailing idea throughout the 20th century in physics. So we hear a populariser, great populariser, Piero Angela.
Brillantissima.
A brilliant
Brillantissima scienziata.
Scientist.
Amalia Finzi.
Amalia Finzi. And
una giovane promessa
a
della
young
nostra ricerca.
promise of our research. Perri.
Sentiamo
We
come si sono appassionati loro alla scienza. Perché
now will hear what triggered their love for science. What did they do? And what happened? Why did they start working on what they're still working? And we want to ask them directly, answer the question, but they can answer us, and this is what they'll do with their autobiography, that is to say, talking about who they are and why they are doing what they're doing. So let's start with Piero Angela, and I would also say with what they did as children. Because if you go and read the history of science, you will realize that most scientists started very early on. That is to say, the passion for science starts with us, with our curiosity as children. And then there are some things that happen and which will address us in one way towards science or something else. Finzi, Piero Angela, or Piero Bianucci on a smaller level, where a plastic binocular bought on the Sousa market showed me that they could bring it closely. Alberto Agliotti. I am even less important, but the word curiosity is the key word for this evening. Curious. We think that you are curious. It's like a quiz. This was the D'Azeglio Secondary School, which I attended in Turin, and this is class 3, third grade. This is 1941-42, and this is the quiz now. One of them is Piero Angela, so we're asking you to guess. None of us did, apart from him and his wife. Second row. Look at his arms. The second from the right, yes. Yes. A round of applause.
Dati segnaletici. La testa leggermente inclinata.
Please notice his head is slightly tilted and his you can't see his legs that are probably crossed, nor can you see his white socks, but he's wearing a tie, if I'm not mistaken. Oh yes, in those days we used to wear ties. Let's hear about something about this photo and about this class. Well, of all these, if you can go back to that image, I have no news of hardly anyone except the one, the fourth from the left, a lawyer here in Turin, Edgardo Genova Fiorio, and the fourth from the left in the top row, with his head slightly tilted, who is Gianfranco Silvestre, who is a dear friend of mine. I can tell you about this, but this boy had had an anti-fascist father who had died in a concentration camp. And at the time, we used to cycle around Turin. I lived in Corso Galileo Ferraris with girls, you know, very bland and youthful cycling, but he didn't have a bike because he didn't have a father, but he wanted to take part in this, and so he used to run on foot. It's like a movie, and every now and again he would stop to catch his breath. Two waiters coming around, because you didn't wait for him. Well, no, we were on a bike. Nor did you lend him a bike, no. I found it very, very sad, but we didn't meet at all for years. And when I wrote this book recently, last year, I mentioned this episode, and I also mentioned that many years later he phoned me and invited me because he had become the Italian cultural attaché in the Italian embassy in Bucharest and invited me, but this was 30 years ago. Then no more contact, and then since I mentioned this book, immediately the phone rang. It's Gianfranco speaking. So these things have a habit of resurfacing. I wondered what all of these friends of mine have become, because I remember one thing to my left, looking at the photo, he's on the right. He was called Gianfranco Allaria. Unfortunately, he deceased, and he was the first in alphabetical order, Allaria and then Angela. And at the time, we had a Latin teacher who was a little perverse because he had called us, so the next time we hadn't really studied much. And then Allaria again. Obviously, he went there, and he got 3 out of 10. 1 for what he had said, 1 because he went, and 1 because he came back to his desk. Angela, 2 out of 10. 1 just because I got to the board, and 1 because I got back. Angela, but you were not really a model student, were you? Well, I studied the minimum union rates, as they said, while Amalia Finzi was very good. No, I have to add something. And primary school, I was very good. I was the second best. Yes, you attended the Riccardi di Netro, while Count Pier Victor Barbierini Amilidei was the first in the class, who had a little red book. No, it wasn't Mao's red book, but he had a little red book. It was called the De Agostini book because they had all the rivers and the rivers like the Orinoco and other rivers. And he was the one who was called to the board, since he was the best, to go to the blackboard and write the good and bad students. And he had put names, and could imagine what they got us to do in those days. So these classes, 4th and 5th, primary school, I had a teacher, and they were going back to the science. I had a teacher who stimulated us. He was a priest, although it was not a religious school. Don Carlo Ghetti, his name was, and he came to school bringing the instruments of physics that he had at home, and he showed us experiments of various kinds and sorts, Leiden's battle and electrolysis, all sorts of things. Maybe this was a first step, but I must say, and I'm going back to curiosity, as all children, I too was curious, and my parents had given me a Mondadori children's encyclopedia in a box, but the volume of Why is the one which I had read most often. Science is trying to understand why. And maybe books are important. Parents give their children too few books nowadays. They give them electronic games and so on. But I think books suited for the age is important. But I believe that curiosity is something personal, probably genetic. Some people are curious, others are not. But it's then life that channels you one way or the other, following a path. I would like to stress that Count Piero Vittorio Amidei was not very good at PE. Pieri, that was a boys' class. Yes, we were all very separate, of course. My sister was entered another way, but even in high school, yes. But you don't remember, for example, any of the girls from another class that maybe was curious and interested in those things? No, I was interested in one of the girls, but it was for other reasons. Yes, I imagine that. I imagined as much. While we hear that Amalia Ercoli Finzi was the top of the class, I don't know if she ever went to the blackboard to write good and bad students. No, I didn't. But certainly she was the best. True? Yes, I was very good at school. I was good, but I was really good. I was the best A-levels in Italy and received a letter from the minister. So I was really good, but I was so good that I remember very well the first maths test that we did in high school, the first year of science high school, and the professor gave us an expression with the result. And I got a different result. So I redid this sort of what the teacher had done. I saw where she made a mistake, and I said, "You made a mistake in this point." She wanted to fail me. She wanted to fail me. Unaccountable. So I was really, really good, but I never wrote a list of good and bad. We were all good in the sense that at the time, I'd like to say to these young people who are here, we started, and there were 52 of us in the class, and 19 of us reached A-levels. All the others had been failed, and they still failed another 3. So selection was very hard, and the ones which came out had been maybe a bit battered around, but much stronger. We must also so also remember that Amalia Ercoli Finzi was the first woman who graduated in aeronautical engineering, because there was no aerospatial at the time. Yes, I would like to say this. I graduated in aeronautical engineer because, well, there was already, because the Sputnik was sent up in '57, but there was not space engineering as we did, for example, in Turin, because Turin has done a lot. So I graduated in aeronautics because at the time it was the cutting edge, and above all, something which was above earth, because trains, ground, car, everything was on the ground. Aeroplanes are so low when they fly that we give the altitude in meters. We say 10,000 meters. We don't say kilometers. We say meters, because if we were to say 10 kilometers, it's like going from Turin to Pinerolo, which is just outside. So there would be no interest. So this photo, which you see me as a little girl, what year? That was my second grade primary school, so it was. Women don't say their age. Oh, yes, you do, because it was the year of the liberation. It was the 25th of April, 1945, when, think if it would have to happen today, on the 25th of April, which was the day of the liberation, the bell rang at 10:30. We were all very pleased because it meant that there was something on, and they sent us home. And while I walked home, I heard the sound of the tanks. They were the tanks coming to liberate the city. But imagining now sending children back on their own with tanks arriving, it's something people wouldn't do it. But we had had such a hard life. I had a very good teacher. Every now and again she called me and she would say, Amalia, you explain, and I used to explain. And then to fly even higher, Amalia Ercoli Finzi devoted her life to space, and the most recent thing she published is to find a comet. Maybe she's doing something else. So after 10 years, the probe has reached the comet, not 10 kilometers. And you sent something on that comet, didn't you? Because you said that you sent something up. The Lady of the Comet, which is the book that I have here published by Dedalo, La Signora delle Comete, talks about the European Rosetta probe, and then we can go back on to talk about Europe. And this probe reached there, and then detached Philae, and that landed on the comet, and this had a drill. No, it wasn't a drill. It was an auger. Right, drill was small. Drill looks as if it's something. Well, it was very small. Maybe it was a very small auger. Or a large drill. It's the same thing. And this object landed on the comet, which is dirty ice, as has been said by the people who have developed the theory of the... Or maybe it's snowy dust or whatever. In any case, it was an adventurous landing, but it did dig in, and we're still waiting for the results. And we hope that the results will be interesting. But let us go back to Piero Angela, and let us see where we are. Oh, where were we is a very important sentence by Enzo Tortora. When he came back after that unfair trial that he had, and he resumed his program Portobello, which all journalists must have envied. After 2 years jail, he resumed his program, and he said, now where were we in Portobello? Here, you can see him in this photo. Yes. These are my the three great friends we were. We remained as such for all their lives, because we were a quartet. Enzo Tortora is on the left, and at the time he was like me and like Gigi Marsico. Who is here today? We were journalists. And as Mario Pogliotti to the right, that unfortunately is no longer with us. And we were a quartet of news reporters, and we're talking about the early 50s. Imagine how many years ago. Then Tortora asked Gigi Marsico the loan of a formal evening suit, and by chance a high television manager had attended this evening performance of his, and he said, that young one will go far. And so we had a meal, because I remember I was about to leave for Paris. Mario also went to Rome, Mario Agliotti, and we went to eat at the Three Kings in Chieri. I don't know if it still exists. Yes, it exists, but it's not the same thing. It's in another place. And we had breadsticks, rubatà they were called. I remember it well. And this dinner was very important, and then each and every one of us went on their own way. Mario Agliotti did some very interesting things. He wrote songs. He also sang as a chansonnier in the 60s. But then he organized also very successful television programs such as Non-Stop, that some of you may remember, and discovered people like Verdone, Troisi, and others. In fact, when he died, we organized a performance in memory of him, and Verdone said, I owe everything to Mario Agliotti because he discovered me. So these friends of mine and I, but two have died, we remain. It's that thread that links you when friendship starts when you were young. They remain. How many school friends? They're different sort of friendships. They're not like other friendships that you develop in life. So this feeling remained, although we didn't meet very often, but when we did, it was as if we had left each other the day before. But I think that you have another photo. While we're looking for the photo, you you talked about the chansonnier Liberovic, for example. Italo Calvino also wrote texts, and the group was called the Canta Cronache, and Liberovic too launched this group that was one of the very first groups of political chansonniers. They were all in Turin. He also wrote a song for my wedding, but I wanted to say something interesting. That is to say, how my work started, because I was doing completely different things. Like Amalia Finzi, Professor Amalia Finzi, I graduated in engineering, and then I got an honoris causa degree without ever having studied. And I was studying engineering, and that was my future, because when I was born, the midwife came out and didn't say a boy or a girl, but said, this is an engineer. And so my family fate was that I was going to be an engineer. And unfortunately, this was not what I liked, but it was music. It was at school with a boy called Ludwig, in honor of Ludwig van Beethoven. Then he died in an air accident in Bulgaria, but that's another story. And I started studying piano. The middle-class people of the time, we had to study piano, but then teaching then, as I believe also now, is punitive. Put your hand like this, do this. And at a certain point, both my sister and I would lock ourselves in the bathroom while my mother would knock at the door because the piano teacher had arrived. But we refused to, so it stopped. But the piano had been bought at this point in the house, and I started playing on my own. And then I became a good pianist, self-taught. And when jazz came after the war, with Gigi Marsico in the evening at 10 o'clock, we would listen to Radio Stuttgart that used to have a jazz program, and with other friends or at the university we set up a band. And when Gigi Marsico in other ways became a journalist at the Turin branch of the public radio television, he started working on texts, and we started working on ideas. And at a certain point he said, "Why don't you help too?" Because they need another person. And I said, "Look, I'm no good. I'm not suited." I had micro panic. If I'd had to speak to an audience, I would have committed suicide, because I was very, very shy at the time. And I said, "Mario Pogliotti will be a good one." And I said it, and Mario Pogliotti took part in these trials. And in the end, I joined in. And in the end, after several months, and then we waited for the opportunity to arise, and we started writing and reporting for the Turin news. And then there was Radio Sera, which was a national program that we took part in. And after 2 or 3 years, they needed suddenly a replacement in Paris. And they said to me, "Why don't you go to Paris?" And I said yes, immediately. And that's how I started work as a correspondent, Paris, Brussels, and so on. And that's where the seed, which was going to bloom, was planted. I started with science reporting, and I really enjoyed it. I remember the first reporting on science that I did was, the first documentary was Visiting Aosta and its Valley. The title wasn't great, of course, but it was like that. So amongst the various things, I described how the hydroelectric power station worked. And I really enjoyed it, because there were a series of examples and so on and so forth. And I said, "I'd really like to do this." So I started doing this. But the real turning point happened when I followed the Apollo program from the US, and there I discovered not so much the technology, but the fundamental or basic research which underlied that, which is not very well known, but all the rockets were disinfected so that no Earth germs would be carried by the probes, since they landed on the moon or other planets. So I went to a center where they studied the origin of life on Earth to understand if these conditions might be found also on other planets, and therefore life on other planets. And this is how I got involved in all this, and I decided to stop reporting on the news. I was then it was 1 o'clock news I was in charge of, and it was the first one made by news reporters, because before that they were just speakers. Well, I remember I was in Brussels, and I was recalled urgently to Rome by the editor-in-chief to have a test and try these newsreels. And the day after, he said, well, I started doing it, and then he said, next week we're going to start it, and we'd like you. And so in 2 days, come back here, bringing a toothbrush and a shirt, and we'll start. I didn't want to come back in Italy after 13 years, and then we talked about it with my wife, and we said, we emigrated a long time ago. This is an opportunity. We'd had a lot of guarantees, so I came back. And then when the course of this news, I came back to Italy, as I said, and I decided that that's what I want to do, and I started to do a series of 10 documentaries on the state of research, both in biology and in neurology, because a brain is something which I'm most interested in. I was a bit long, but...
Lei dice che a quel punto scoprì un mondo, cioè si accorse che c'era tutto il mondo della ricerca e che non c'era nessuno in Italia che lo raccontava.
That all the world of research, and there was no one in Italy who was describing it. Yes, I had some very beautiful documentaries that sometimes were broadcast, and so I thought that we could have them together. And when I started doing Quark at the beginning of the program, because especially when we had the 2-hour program, because I soon realized, also through my long-standing experience as a journalist, that to attract people's attention, get them involved, you have not only to have the appropriate language, but also you must be interesting, appealing, possibly amusing. And these documentaries were a bit what might attract a general audience so that would stay on. For example, somebody reminded me of Don Bosco, and he used to work as a magician and then teach children about religion. And I used the documentary, and then I would explain the science. And I also used Bruno Bozzetto's cartoons. We did some of the most difficult things, because if you talk about, say, quantum mechanics, you can't film anything. If you talk about relativity, superconductors, or entropy, we described all these things with cartoons. Some were used by schools, and unfortunately is in the archives now, and really can't be repeated because the cost is no longer viable nowadays. But in those times, production costs, yes, they were colored by hand. In a second, there are 24 frames, and each one has to be colored by hand. 24 a second, you can imagine. Yes, all the animation, 7, 8, or even 10 minutes. So the cost was phenomenal. At least as far as I know, in terms of what they pay us, is no longer manageable. It was a great passion. But I would like to add one thing. I don't want to take room to all the room of the other speakers, especially our young Perri, who's the hope for the future. Science, which is what I got involved with, is not just discovering things. It's the method of science, the ethics of science. We were talking about it before coming here. Science gets you used to the fact that you have to be objective, to fight against your own emotions and your imperfections, because you must accept what your enemy, so to speak, has discovered, and that maybe you're questioning. But if they have proved it, that's what it is. Science, in science, there are endless points, but in general, there is this law that means that when you prove what you say, everybody has to accept it, which means that you learn how to eat humble pie, how to be tolerant, to recognize other people's ideas if they're right, to admire those who do better than you, and also, well, scientists are a bit like violin players. They earn very little, but if you have a passion for painting, for music, this is a major satisfaction. Money are useful personally, but also for research. And that's where people are very tight, where institutions are too tight. And science is a form of philosophy because it answers or tries to answer the big questions of natural philosophers, where we come from, astrophysics, how the Earth started, or geology, paleogeology, or how life developed, biochemistry, or how humans developed, so on. What is matter physics? What you have within a matter, particle physics, and what you have inside human beings, that's genetics. Why do we behave in certain ways? What is there inside our brains, neurology? If you think of all these questions, which from Aristotle onwards humans have tried to address, you realize what knowledge is. Step at a time, you develop your knowledge. So if you become passionate, if you get involved in all these things, clearly it's very important. I will now conclude with one thing, but then I don't want to talk anymore because I don't want to steal other people's time. A short episode, I've written many books, but the first one is always the most important one, because I remember that when it was published at Gigi's house, we had partied, champagne, we wet the book with champagne, signed. It was a big emotional day for me, and the book was called Man and a Puppet. That is to say, how they condition you and how you are conditioned in your behavior. So genetics, as far as or the instinctive part is concerned, and the environment as or the part that you've learned through education. We're now talking about 72, so mechanisms of DNA and biochemistry of the brain, and although not much was known then, but there was a general picture. And I received a letter from a lady from Varese who said, I must thank you very much because at long last I understood things that I hadn't understood. I read a lot, but at a certain point I get very confused. It's like being in a fog and I didn't understand, while your book is written in a very pleasant and then she said in a rather bawdy way, meaning, but in Italian it's scorrevole, which means easy to read, or scurrile, which means bawdy. And I pointed out this, and she said that unfortunately she had only attended primary school because her parents couldn't send her to school. She was a nurse, an orderly, but she was very intelligent and she really wanted to understand. And so there was a lot of people I understood who were curious, but who lacked the knowledge. And if you give them the key to open the door of knowledge, they will enter with you. They will, if you tell them all their story and the wonderful things that science have, and that every time switch the light of knowledge on, you would be okay. If you do this, very many people, and you could start with yourself. I've written 39. I'm 90, but I've written 39 books. Yes, all the topics very, very different. And every time I myself had to gather the information. Well, that's the fun. Yes. No, it's not fun. It's suffering. I have fear of saying things wrong. if you're writing literature, you can write whatever you want because no one can say anything because you have freedom of thought. But if you write science popularization, if you make a mistake, even something, so immediately they're going to shoot you in the back. And so this thing really helped me understand, and I thought that thereafter that it was possible to open the door of science to everyone, and young people in particular. And I must say that the young people have this, and this is, well, don't bear in mind that in 3 weeks I will be 90. Luckily, the brain's still working. That's the very important things. Knees are not so good, but my brain's still working. So you feel that this must be done by young people, the emerging young people, because it's passing the baton on to the next generation. Well, people from the Enlightenment are treated as if they were idiots, but they're not. The fact that you try to shed a light, you enlighten people, is still a very good idea. I think to shed light on this country, because this country needs it.
Luca Perri.
Oddio, sì.
Senti la
Luca Perri.
Abbastanza, sì.
Do you feel the pressure? Yes.
Esatto, esatto.
Now he's spoken. He said what he had to say. Now we give the floor to Amalia Finzi.
No.
Luca, have you ever been told that you have to give a body description? No, but I've been told once that I used the Bible in the wrong way because I organized a laboratory on homeopathy, and it was a laboratory where I questioned homeopathy, and I said, in theory, you had to beat it on a Bible, and somebody in the audience got really angry with me, so I was accused of that. But no, I've never been told I was bawdy. Well, Piero Angela used champagne on his book. Luca Perri is an astrophysicist, and in this moment he is a doctoral student in Insubria, but he's also an astronomer in the Merate Observatory, but he's also a very lively popularizer. Yes. Yes, very lively. I'm going to use the informal form with you because it wouldn't be credible. And Luca Perri is also self-ironical, and he also mentions this in the latest of his 3 books. Yes, it's Logorrhea. It's called Astrobufale. And he says he uses humor, but yes, he uses it, but not as a rational choice. He says that he has no social skills. Yes, I don't know how to be serious for more than 2 minutes and a half, so the idea of using humor is a necessary way out. It's not a rational thing, but apparently it works, so I was lucky. Right, Luca, we can start with the photo of when he was young, a few years ago. I would like to say that I have nothing to do with this, but unfortunately it was an idea of mine. And so which one is Luca Perri? Top right, excluding the 3 on the left. No, I'm not top right, no.
Quello sdraiato, quello rianimato.
I'm lying down. They're resuscitating me, yes. This was the yearbook of the last year of high school, and it says ready for exams. And we decided that we would do something serious. So I am the one that's being resuscitating with an iron and not wearing a miniskirt. Yes, this is a school photo. And the student who was studying, you were studying just to get the minimum, and the excellent student, but I was terrible. I didn't have a method, but since I had a good memory and being a bit brazen, I had very high marks, so I was hated by everyone, especially because there had been a particularly episode where everybody started hating me. Well, for me, physics was very easy because my mother is a physics teacher, so either I liked physics or I could shoot myself. I decided that I liked physics, but not engineering, unfortunately. Yes, you can see it. And so my colleagues, my friends, were asking me to volunteer for the physics exam, and once I did, and then they came the week after, and I had just had a test, so I was quiet, and they said, we didn't, all of them, we didn't study today. And so you volunteer again, because at the time we had we had a rule whereby once a term you could decide not to sit an exam. The idea is that you wouldn't fail. So if they call us, we will all say that we won't go, so they'll call you. And I said, no, you can use all your ones off, and this is what happened. But I was a bit, well, at the end, they nearly liked me. I don't know if you can see that from the photo, but let's go to the next picture. Now, this one is the teacher that stimulated me. He was my science professor, Federici. He was a botanist. Well, no one's perfect. Physicists hate everybody. You should know that. He was a botanist and a man of science. He was in the papers because he identified an alchemilla, which is a plant. It's green in any case, and he found it. He identified it as a species, so they called it Alchemilla federiciana, and he taught me how to see that science is not divided into different branches, but it's all connected, even physics and engineering. And well, of course, we have to maintain a distance, but we can say that, unfortunately, we have to work all together. And he also taught me to ask myself questions on whatever, even on the things that appear to be obvious, because they're not obvious, and they are obvious for us, maybe they weren't a few decades previously. So this approach which he gave me was the one that was essential for me in approaching science. I also dedicated this in my undergraduate dissertation, because in spite of my mother, who was a physicist but didn't want me to register, when I said her answer was, may God help me. And so if I decided to read physics, it's also due to him. And I wanted to thank him for this. Yes. Here, I grew up near Bergamo, and in Bergamo we have GiovedìScienza, which is the second science festival in Italy. And so right from the first editions, I attended the audience, and then one day I decided to work as a volunteer. It was successful, and thereafter, slowly, I became part of the organization of the festival, and now it's my privilege to be for the past 3 years, I've led the introductory lectures, so GiovedìScienza is my second home. as a popularizer, that's my home, and then I developed further as a popularizer. This is the Genoa Festival, which is probably the first and the largest in Italy, and I was already 20-something, probably 26, and this year was the 6th year in Genoa, and this is important. Both Bergamo-Scienza and Genoa were important in terms of understanding how to relate to the audience, because there I had to speak to the audience directly, see how much I could joke, on myself, because if I only mock the audience, it won't work. But luckily, my mother taught me a bit of how to mock myself, as well as teaching me physics. So if currently I am involved in popularization, it's due to this, and if I do something good in this, it's to do with the fact that I have learned how to communicate with people. When I write, I have always told the publishers that I have to read as I speak, because people have to imagine that I'm actually standing there in front of them. I'm not a professor, I can't hold a lecture, so I must be, in the end, a friend with whom you discuss something after dinner. That's my idea. So this ability or skill to speak to the audience started here.
Qua invece siamo sul lato
scienza, lato ricerca.
Here it's science and research. This is La Palma and the Canary Islands. I was lucky enough to work there for 3 years, not consecutively, but in terms of research, I design and plan parts of telescopes. This particular one, which is called Chirica telescopes, this was in 2014. It was an Italian expedition or team. At the time, we had there was Giovanni Bignami, who was particularly proud of that. He was the president of the Astrophysics Institute, and I'm the second from the left. And we had assembled the mirrors of that telescope, which is called Magic. It's 17, there are two twins, 17 meters of diameters, and we produce those mirrors in Merate, just outside Milan. And something which is often not said enough is that in terms of research, Italy ranks right up at the top in terms of quality. Obviously, we have no money, but the quality is there. And so, for instance, these mirrors, to manufacture them and assemble them, were the only ones who can do it and have a good quality product. So I worked both in assembling them and in gathering the data from the 18-hour day's work. If the newsman, that's me, one of the researchers died falling off that, yes, a foreign one, consider we're hanging at 17 meters, and you remain hanging for hours. We used to sleep there too, because it was so long to go down and come up again. So in the pauses or breaks, we slept there. At night, a researcher went to double-check the camera of the telescope on the tower, which was 15 meters. There was, unfortunately, an open trapdoor, and in the dark there you can't see anything because it's absolute darkness. You can see the Milky Way, but you can't see anything else. We used to walk holding the next one, and he didn't realize that the trapdoor was open, and he fell. And in fact, the telescopes bear his name.
Siamo andati a girare una parte del programma di Piero Angela
Here we had part of Piero Angela's program on universe, journey in the cosmos. And here, how I'd like to hear what Amalia Finzi has to say. We would like her to tell us something about her job. Let's see a few photos. There was a nice photo, and now it was the only time I looked good in it. I look good there, don't I?
Nella mia famiglia, da generazioni,
you must know that in my family, for generations, there's always one of the girls who's very beautiful. In my case, it was my sister. She was very beautiful, while I was not beautiful. But I wasn't bothered, because every time my mother said, yes, I have 2 daughters, and she always used to send my sister. I love this photo because it says that you can do what I'm doing, that I've done for all my life, with a normal life. I was an absolutely normal person, a normal girl. I was excellent in disassembling things, and I disassembled everything. The valves, lights, when there were valves, with the tin. Yes, that was the trip switch, and they used to send me to mend it. I had understood the problem. It was because our tin wire was too thin, so I produced a good plait of it. And next time there was a surge, the whole building lost electricity because I had saved ours. I disassembled bikes. Because I always had some bits extra in reassembling them. I always had, but why? I honestly believe that I was born an engineer. I always tried to understand how things work, and that's not easy. Life is not like that. Yes. To be truthful, while I was trying to do this, I got married in between. I had 5 children, that was not very easy. But can you show a photo? What is one of my successes is the work which I did on the International Space Station. Our glory, because before that there was the Mir, which was very beautiful, but when we put this up, because we couldn't have 2 stations, and they decided that they would accept this one. And this has a contribution of many nations, including Russia. Can you see that sort of beam there is? Right, when you're in space, mass is not necessary, because in any case you fall at the same speed. So you fall, even if you're very light, you would fall with the others. But there's another thing, that mass is very important to give stiffness. That is to say, to avoid that there are strange movements. That blessed beam there is something, I did it, part of it was made in my lab, breathes. It is so light that it breathes. Sometimes there's a vibration in a day. That is to say, it moves like that. But you understand that attached to that, there are solar panels, radiators, aerials, everything, because so that those on the ground want it to be well positioned. They don't want the aerial to move around. They want to be able to control it. And so that's what I was involved in, these systems of monitoring of these vibrations. And look at how beautiful it is. And I'm very proud of this. But your 6th baby. But look at it. This is Rosetta. I worked a lot on Rosetta for many years, and it really made my life hell. But we produced a satellite with wings, 64 square meters of solar cells. Look at them, beautiful. And you know that some people say that solar cells must be well positioned, because if you don't reflect it well, you won't get even heating in the house or hot water. Now, Look at this. This is a photo in space. Look at how they're all well aligned, perfect. I must say that we were very good. I am very fond of Rosetta, partly because of this journey, 10.5 years, and at a certain point we had to put it to sleep, hibernate it, because we were so far from the sun that we didn't even have that little electricity necessary for the receivers. We couldn't do anything, so we hibernated it. We hibernated it, and we woke up 2.5 years later. We had a 1-hour window to wake it up, because then the comet disappears, everything moves. That's what the Lord decided, and that's his problem. 1 hour. And she woke up after 50 minutes, Rosetta, so we were going 50 minutes. We thought we would die, but we managed to wake it up. And at this point, I called, as I always did, called my instrument. My instrument was there on Rosetta. I called it the one with the drill. It's not a drill, it's an orga. Yes. Well, this is something, the photo that we took during the journey to Mars, fly by Mars. You can see that there's the aerial, the 2 aerials, and there's Mars below, and we were at 250 kilometers. So wonderful, but not only. If I think about it, we were in the course of an eclipse, because when we left, that was a year after we should have left, Mars had gone on its own. So when we went close to it, in fact, we were hidden. So the solar cells didn't work. Do you know what we did? The only experiment that the Americans cooperated with, we took the batteries, and using their batteries, we managed to take these photos. Well, we got our best. You took advantage of Mars, too. Yes, big thrust. A gravitational maneuver, always. Gravity assist. It's become... Yes, I want to say this. The first gravity assist, which we have heard of, and now they all say we did it, the Americans or someone else, no, was by Enrico Fermi when he was 21, when in the course of his graduation from the Pisa Scuola Normale, we Italians, especially you youngsters, you have very distant and deep roots because we're good people. We're intelligent. There's no... And Enrico Fermi was a physicist, though.
Momento.
Yes, wait a minute. It's true. I have to acknowledge it, yep. But then lots of things of when he prepared the atomic bomb, he worked as an engineer. Yes, the dark side. Can you show the next photo? Look at this. Look at what sort of a comet they gave us. Ugly, isn't it? Well, it looks like the provola cheese, like, well, there are two comets that going closely to each other, slowly, sort of kissed. And you see, all you need is a piece of string, which would be the third element, and then it would look like provola cheese. And we managed to land on it with this terrible, because it's a sort of washing machine, a meter by a meter by a meter, with its... and you can see here, there was my instrument, which is this orga, not a drill, orga, which had a little tube at the bottom with which it gathers samples. It's not a drill. And we then have the little tube, push it out, and we gather the sample. We then withdraw it, and you can see that it then deposits the sample that it was taken. It deposits it, and you can see it's a diamond blade, and it deposits them, and we heat them, all made in Italy by good engineers. Maybe the physicists suggested it, right? Okay. And at this point, what do? We heat them. We heat the sample because by heating it, we generate volatile components, not birds, not volatile. They're the gases that are generated. And so it's really a masterpiece, especially if you see it still working 10 years after. I tell you that when we woke it up after that journey, and I switched my instrument on, and my instrument said, ready, I burst into tears. It was such an emotion, such an incredible emotion. Well, in any case, we then landed, and I'll show it to you. Look at it. Look at the 3 photos. The first has a little red circle, which was where we were supposed to land on that very ugly comet. And you see that in the first photo, there's nothing. 5 minutes before landing. The one after, inside the red circle, there's a shadow. We had landed 5 minutes after landing. And the one here has a green point, which is where we should have landed. And we were 500 million kilometers away from the sun. We landed at 100 meters from where the ideal landing spot was, and we were really good, and I want a round of applause for this. And now I'll tell you what our problem is. And there, show the other one. And then the hooks, those 2 that you can see that were supposed to, the hooks or harpoons that should have held us up. No, you can't see anything. All right. We were supposed to anchor it, and the hook or harpoon is like harpooning a whale. What are you doing? He's looking for the harpoon. In any case, we had made everything or done everything for this to happen, but at the moment in which we activated the harpoons that have a very little charge, the charge didn't work. Who had engineers? It's engineering problem? No. The harpoons were the Max Planck Institute, Mrs. Merkel. It was them, not us. German engineers failed. And then don't tell her I didn't hand it to her. Yes, and that's where we, if you were successful in producing the next photo, he has a German photos. Then we jumped 2 kilometers, and there we are. Look what we did. 2 hours to jump, a leap. And we ended up in that point in the bottom, which is on the edge of the comet. Stop a second. On the edge of the comet, but luckily, when we left, we had a speed that was 4 centimeters a second below the flight speed. If we would have lost it. And if I have to use a scientific term for that, I would say we were damn lucky. We'd lost it. She speaks in a very clear and bawdy manner. I'll tell you something, my life after this, because here we'd lost it. We were at the end of 2016, September 2016, and Rosetta to continue to circulate around the comet to see if we could find the probe. Every day we used to take photos. A friend of mine from Darmstadt who does this. She used to take all the photos and she would read them, see what there was, and was hoping to find the probe. One evening, it was September the 2nd, 2016, she took the photos. It was on the divan. She took the photos. She went, she said, today we didn't catch anything. She called her son, who was 5 and who was watching television. He was watching cartoons and said, time for bed. And he said, one more, Mummy, one more money, one more cartoons, please, just one. All right, she said. And she took, again, a photo, and the one you can see on the right, there is a little square, and she said, but there's something here. She enlarged it, and she saw a probe. So on September the 2nd, we found it. Look at it. The leg is turned upwards. It's virtually at 90 degrees. That is to say, the body is all turned left. It's a left turn. And you can see the white point, which is on the top there. Can you see it? It's my instrument. I saw it on the comet. At this point, it was the end of September, and we had a signal that tells us when Rosetta was alive. On the 30th of September, we switched it off, and this is what we got. That's the end of the mission. It's finished. Rosetta was on the comet, and now we're trying to think of other things. But this photo is a message for all of us. This is a part of the group that worked only on Philae the probe. There's a whole of Europe here. Here there are youngsters, old people, but there's a whole of Europe. And this, for me, is the great meaning of this mission. Europe, we are very, very good. We Europeans are extremely good. We're a power, and we're able to do fantastic things, such as landing on a comet.
L'Europa della scienza funziona, ci sono tante altre Europe che funzionano, non ascoltate chi ne parla così male.
Europe of science work, and there are lots of other Europes that work. Don't tell you that, don't listen to people who tell you don't. I would like Piero Angela to talk about Europe, because Europe, people who are our age, we saw Europe being founded and growing, and unfortunately we're also seeing it decline. And Piero Angela was in Brussels when Europe reached virtually the point where it could have become something else. Yes, this is another story, of course, but those who experienced that time had the dream of a united Europe, as I saw it, and how you saw it. There have been a lot of disappointments. There are moments when things like the sliding doors, it could have gone one way or the other. One was the European defense, because if Europe wants to be united and become a federal republic, just like other countries, you have to unite some of the basic things. The currency, which was a miracle, an army, foreign policy, and so on and so forth. Some fundamental key points, well, also tax, which are the ones that make it possible for a society to work. Now there was a moment in Brussels where the Commission and Italy, but also Germany and Holland, were pushing for a greater integration. But there was France that had a tradition a very strong tradition. Let us not forget that before the war, France was one of the great world powers. I remember at school, but you too, there were maps of the world, and the pink was for the UK colonies and the purple for the French ones, and it was all pink and purple. France was a grande puissance with a very strong tradition. The empire, Napoleon wasn't that far. And what about Le Roi Soleil? So all of this becoming one of the countries like Belgium and Holland, this clashed with the personality, but of a man such as de Gaulle, who at the time was the head of the government and of the Republic. So there was a moment when the Commission tried to force its way, because there were two types of decisions that could have been made. One was that of having a small routine work and work with a majority vote, imposing their choice to the various countries. But there were small matters. When there were major decisions, the real decisions, then you had the Council of Ministers. Well, the Commission tried to englobe powers that pertain to the Council of Europe. The other countries accepted, but France was made. I was there that night, and they made a scene. The meeting went on till 5 in the morning, and this French foreign minister, Cour de Melville, was looking very somber. And then the Dutch minister said, we finished 1963, I think. Yes, 63, I think. But if you'll allow me a joke, the Dutch man was very tall, very amusing, because strangely Holland had a mechanism whereby it has two ministers who came to this meeting, the foreign minister and the foreign trade. It wasn't quite clear why they had two foreign secretaries, but he said because Holland is a very small country. The foreign world is very big, which is why we need two ministers or secretaries. So the others went on. So basically France at that moment decided the empty chair, did not attend for 6 months, and said, if we go on like this, we will leave. And that was the funeral of Europe, because that slow process, diplomatic process, to further develop integration, it was certain, had a deadly blow there. So much so that at the time we didn't want the UK to enter, because we knew that the UK was outside this idea of integration. It was a dominating country. I mean, the UK was of great power before the war. So at that point said, well, since we can't have united Europe, let's do what we can. And that is what happened. Without the strong spirit, Jean Monnet, Schumann, De Gasperi were hoping after the wars that had lacerated Europe for centuries, had hoped to do this, so much more that given that the world was becoming different. The US was blooming after World War I, and then Asia that was growing. And so today, as Professor Finzi said we have a wonderful continent full of people and potential for comets, but not all comets. I spent a whole life traveling throughout the world, and Italian scientists are amongst the best appreciated in Geneva, we know. Well, there, really, Italians are leaders, but everywhere it's like this, because ours is an intelligent country. But what we don't have is a system intelligence, because you have to say using our intelligence. We're very much lacking in terms of managing our country, the system. But everything started in Europe, and unfortunately, this means that this continent is declining, and also because of demography, which people are not that concerned. That is to say, this demographic decline, which especially in Italy exists, but also in Europe. And as Darwin used to say, the winners are the ones that generate children and more of them and are fertile. Quality is important, but numbers. We are aging. We're aging very rapidly. You know that in 2050 in Italy there will be 150,000 people who are over 100 and very few young people. So we will be in company, there will be lots of us. There are no family policies. What I'm really surprised of, this 10 years ago with Lorenzo Pinna, we wrote a book, Why We Should Have More Children. We're talking about this with population studies, all the mechanisms, starting from the Fornero pension law, that had already taken this into consideration, that we will have too many old age pensioners with youngsters that will not have a pension. At one time in the past, there were two brothers for one old person. Now there's one person that has to look after two elderly people, maybe sufferers of Alzheimer. And so lots of things have to be planned. Nothing has been planned. So this is what really surprises us. While in science, there was this mentality. We try to be rational and understand things, simulate things mentally. Although the outcomes may vary, but going back to Europe, now we're stumbling on with very strong trends for disgregation. The single currency was a miracle that day. It was the 1st of January, I can't remember of what year, when the euro was launched. There was a ceremony in Brussels where there was Romano Prodi, if I'm not mistaken, who was our prime minister at the time, and Ciampi, who had been one of the people to develop it. And I went there with the small crowd that launched balloons. And said, look at how many things could have happened and didn't. If Alberto agrees, because he has to collaborate, we have to collaborate. Would like to reach the conclusions by giving the floor to Piero Angela and Amalia Finzi, Luca Perri. Well, that's all right. I'll bring him in. I would like to, only because he's a physicist. There he is. First of all, here we have him.
Commento? Oddio,
no,
sì.
allora, qui,
questo è stato...
Allora,
questo è stato un incontro che io e il dottor Angela abbiamo avuto l'anno scorso.
Meeting that
oggi il dottor Angela mi ha detto
Dr. Angela and I had last year. Today he saw me and said that I put on weight, and this was really... he recognized me, but he said I put on weight. You put on weight, and that was really a blow. Here I didn't really believe I was there, and I already had a dream. And yes, you see, he's much thinner here. Yes, why don't you put salt to my wound? Well, I had dreamt for years to meet Piero Angela, because if there's something which brought me to astrophysics is a little booklet which is called A Journey in the Cosmos, which dates 96, 97. In fact, if you would like to write to the dear physicist Perri, I would be very pleased. Thank you. And I believe that was the first book of science popularization that I read. I was about 10, so it's your fault if I became an astrophysicist. There you are. So you're the criminal. And an excellent astrophysicist. Yes, everybody told me in France, everybody is a physicist, just to say that everybody's unpleasant in France. So last year I was giving Angela my first book. I think is one of the things that I will tell my grandchildren. Yes, but where was the episode? We will finish with something which is serious after these things which only physicists would find funny. And I would finish in showing a slide, what are they called, a photo of not Piero Angela, but his father. But it is an episode where I would also ask Amalia Ercoli Finzi to bring in, but you will see that the topic is one. Same. Here you see the memorial stone. Where is it and what is it? This is for me obviously something which is extremely important for me and which involves me, because these are things that I experienced directly. This is on the wall of a nursing home in San Maurizio Canavese, which is a village quite close to the Caselle airport, where my father was the psychiatrist, and he was the director of a neurology, well, a clinic for, he was an anti-fascist, and he was a psychiatrist, and there was this nursing home for psychiatric patients. He had hidden various Jews and political prisoners, and he risked his life for these people because they were about to shoot him. They shot another 3, and he was saved by chance because there was a person present who knew him. And having saved Jews and politicals, there was one of these refugees who was called Segre, Renzo Segre. He had his name, he went under the name of Sagrato, which was close to Segre. In any case, I knew him very well because he spent 3 years in the nursing home. He'd been evacuated, and then he wrote a diary which was published many, many years later by Salerio. It was called 20 Months. Speaking about this, and this was seen by the Jewish community and then by Yad Vashem, that was that center in Israel that recognizes the righteous of the nations, people who risk their own lives to save Jews. So this is the memorial stone that was put up when he was awarded the recognition by Yad Vashem. And now, in giving the floor to Amalia Ercoli Finzi, I would like to add that not this evening, but normally, if you would like to, if you happen to be in Via Verdi and you enter the Chancellor's office a few meters from here, there is an exhibition on the racial laws applied in the Turin University. There are a lot of documents there but very interesting. You'll find some on Primo Levi, Rita Levi-Montalcini. But the most interesting thing is the entrance, because you will go to this exhibition on the first floor of the Chancellor's office, and there are 2 flights of stairs that are 58 steps, and on each step you will walk on the name of a Jewish professor that was expelled from the University of Turin. I worked on this, and I think that young people should visit. Yes, it's my turn. I could say that I have a parallel episode, because I was born in 1937, so I remember the war. In particular, I remember being hungry, which is something terrible, because they were telling us that children shouldn't eat too much because otherwise they wouldn't sleep. We would have slept at night, but that we didn't have enough food. And my father was a partisan, but not up in the mountains. He was working with the partisan, and we in the city. We used to hide, because the family was involved too, the young conscripts that should have fought with the regime, and we used to hide them in the sense that we had a woodshed. In the woodshed, in the middle of the wood, inside, there was a sort of space where these youngsters would be hidden during the day. In the night, we let them out, or the children, we used to go and take to them in our house, and to those who were hidden nearby, we used to take food to them. I remember that we used to remove a little log, and through the hole that you had, you gave them what we had to give them to eat, which wasn't much. Our life was in danger, and my mother, for instance, was always worried, and we 2 children used to feel this fear, because if they discovered us, they would have shot us, and we knew that. And once I said to my father, why do we have to live this life? Why? Look at the others. The others who live well, as you can in the war. Look at the sort of life that we do. And he said to me, because I want my children to smell the perfume of freedom. And this is a great sentence. So we started with the passion for science, and then freedom. Passion for freedom comes before. It's a precondition for science. Now I would like to ask our speakers a very short question, one each. Curiosity must be grown, but it has to be sown too. There has to be somebody who inspires you. So I would like to ask our guests to give bit of advice to the youngsters who are here, and to the youngsters who's here, but he too will speak. That is to say, how do you trigger curiosity? Who's going to start? Luca Perri. Yes. Hot potato has to be, yes. And a physicist, yes. If there is a piece of advice that I can give the youngsters, if they decide to devote their life to science, it is to follow your curiosity, but also your madness, because I think that if you want to do something new, something which no one has done before, you must be a bit mad. And so if there is something which science has taught me, that is that very often you reach a result not following a straight and narrow, but following randomly, following questions that may be stupid for the rest of the world or useless, but in fact we don't know where our madness will take us. And another bit of advice I can give is, if you will not find the discovery of the century, don't worry, because the beautiful thing about science is that you all work in a community. So if I get everything wrong in my life, and you will make mistakes, they will make, because yes, me too, well, every day, yes. So even if you make mistakes in life, those mistakes will be useful to others to get the right idea. So don't do your job with the pressure that you have to make the discovery of the century. Bernardo Chartres used to say that we are dwarfs on the shoulders of giants. There's always a giant that will develop this. So we have to be humble and work for the common good, and in doing it, madness is essential. So don't worry if you make a mistake. Piero Angela, advice. I don't know if any of you know, because you're all very young, Novello, who was a cartoonist, who used to write cartoon strips for La Stampa in the 50s. I considered him a genius. There are still some books, Il Signore di Buona Famiglia, What Will People Say? They're delightful books. As a wedding present to my son, I gave him an original drawing of Novello's, and how I and my son both appreciate him. In one of these drawings, you can see a youngster who's lying under the blankets in his room. It's night, and on the wall there is a mask of Beethoven, a cello, and it says, the young man Francesco, whose parents want him to be a musician, by night studies accountancy, which is what he really would like to do. Now, what does this mean? You mustn't force anyone to do something. It's a mistake. It's like trying to turn me into an engineering and have expectations. I really think that passion stems from curiosity that people have or don't have. I see it also in adults. There are people who continue to talk and ask me this and that, and others who couldn't care. I also see it at the beginning when he started working on television, and he'd become quite well known. I had become quite well known. There were some who followed me and others who didn't. Now everybody knows me, but at the time they didn't. So there was someone who said, Piero Angela. Maria, come here, come and see who there is. And Maria would come and say, well, don't you know who he is? No, I don't. He does on television. No, never seen him. And I was waiting there just to say that I really think that there must be an inner flame, genetic possibly, but you must be able to expose young people to. I have a son, and when he was tiny, he was a science lover. Without me having done everything, at the time I was a journalist, a news reporter, but he was like all children. He loved things. He wanted to know why and what, and space and so on. But it was something different because he also did other things. Well, I shouldn't say anything because family things shouldn't really be discussed. In any case, he was passionate about it. Then what did he do? Well, he's done a few things. So I think this is important. That is to say, to create the conditions for them to be able to find their vocation and express it. The two things must exist: the environment that stimulates, but also the inner leaning. And if it's not there, it's like music. I love music. Maybe I would have been a musician. I did it for a while, but I was a jazz pianist. I studied also classics. I started the 8th year piano classes, but too late. So you must put people in a situation with teachers that have to be the right one. I was punished when I studied music, so I had to stop, and then I had to go back and teach myself. So these are the 3 things. You must have a predisposition, the right teachers, but also be exposed to it. And this is the thing that you can do. In this case, I remember an episode that impressed me, that one of the great paleontologists, Jay Gould, who has developed one of the theories of evolution, has rewritten Darwin to a degree. And he says that his passion started when his father took him to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Yes, that is an extraordinary museum, if you have the opportunity to see it, where things appear, speak to you, and accompany you. So maybe we haven't got a bit of this. I must say, with great regret, that I had participated here in Turin in the competition that the region had prepared about 15 years ago for the new Science Museum with Paco Lanciano, and I think our project was good. And I had been very involved in it, and we had won. We were first by a distance, but there had been a mistake in the tender on the formula, because all the contracts have to be to the lowest bidder. And so they'd made a mistake. And so the result, the 4th or 5th was then won, then it wasn't done. It never came to being. I think this would be important. Unfortunately, now it's closed. For many years now it has been closed. So you must do things that will stimulate people. And this is essential. It's also schools and responsibility. Amalia.
2 parole. A me neanche la fotografia, eh? A loro ci hai fatto la fotografia, a me niente, fa niente.
Perdonato, perdonato. I never even got the photo. They gave him the photo. All right, all right. You're forgiven. My words are for women. Women have... women are a mine which is not used, not exploited, because in science, in this world where you need imagination, passion, and interest, we are the ones. It's our world. It's made for us. So I say that with little girls, give them dolls, but also give them a Meccano set. Thank you. Thank you very much. We would like to thank the University of Turin that hosted us, the volunteers of the Association Solidarietà Insieme, who did overtime, and our guests, Luca Perri, Amalia Ercoli Finzi, and Piero Angela. Who is writing on Luca's book. See you next week here at 5:45 with Beatrice Mautino and Cosmetics.